Welcome back, everyone. In the first two chunks of this webinar, components of this webinar, we focused on considerations for equitable grading practices, and we also began to distinguish outcomes from learning targets. This next session is going to focus specifically on the importance of assessment alignment and how it can work to help learners gain traction and to help us begin creating a system where the pursuit of more equitable grading practices becomes possible. If you take a peek at this image, you'll notice and perhaps remember how when we design a course, we typically start with the end in mind. We design course outcomes and we align our final summative assessment to those outcomes. A summative assessment, again, is an opportunity for us to assess the mastery of course content and skills after learners have had ample opportunity to practice, revise, and iterate on their thinking in ways that are much more low stakes. A final summative assessment bears significant weight inside of our grading scheme. A formative assessment might not. It's important to align our formative assessments to our summative assessments if we're going to gain traction with learners and grade equitably, though. So let's take a peek. Once we know what our course outcomes are and what our final summative assessment might challenge learners to do, we can begin to align our module outcomes accordingly. Each module might include a formative assessment that invites learners to demonstrate what they've learned target by target and small lesson by small lesson. So each day I might use a variety of very low stakes formative assessment options to check in on how learners mastered the small bit of content, the small skill, the learning target of that particular in very brief lesson. Using that formative assessment data to guide my instruction will ensure that at the end of the module, if I decide that I'm going to give a quiz, or I decide that I'm going to use some sort of brief journal entry or a writing task, or even invite learners to meet with me and have some sort of oral assessment of the entire module outcomes, that students have had ample opportunity to practice, and that I've shifted my instruction and been really responsive to the needs that I noticed day by day or lesson by lesson. And I understand that all lessons aren't necessarily taught day by day. So forgive me for that slip there. If I know what my course outcomes and final assessment are going to look like, and I've aligned them accordingly, my module outcomes must be aligned to those course outcomes, and I can have a module formative assessment that does the same thing. The module formative assessment is still low stakes, although it might be weightier in our gradebook compared to the informal checks for understanding that I'm doing lesson target by lesson target. If you look at this image, you'll see that I've shared opportunities for 8 different module level formative assessments to occur. And your mileage may vary depending on how your course is constructed. But essentially, once we have a final assessment in place and we have module assessments in place, we can begin to align our lessons accordingly. We have the alignment of the course outcomes to the module outcomes on the left, and that allows us to begin defining specific lesson targets. In a single lesson, then, I will teach briefly around one small target. I will give learners the opportunity to engage in some guided practice, and I will try to peek over their shoulders somehow, look into their work, and assess formatively. These sorts of assessments are not graded, but the findings are documented. And if I use that documentation to reflect on my own instruction, it helps me offer better feedback to the learner so that they can revise their work, but it also helps me. It's excellent feedback for me so that I can change and be responsive in my instruction as well. When I'm speaking about the kinds of assessments that we might offer formatively within a single lesson, These are some examples that might appeal to you. If you have your own copy of the slides, which you can find on the ID website, you can click on these links to get to examples of anticipation guides. Think Ink pair and share protocols, ticket in and out the door. Tools like Padlet, Jamboard, Pear Deck, Nearpod, um, Edpuzzle. There are many others as well. And Flipgrid is another really wonderful one for oral and video formative assessment, and storyboards. These tools are all very accessible ways and quick ways to check for understanding in a single lesson. You might also look over the shoulder of students as you're wandering the room, or if you're working with them virtually, you might consider asking them to add a slide to your slide deck where they share their thinking, their learning, or their work. Quizzes, drafts of writing pieces, and prototypes of products that students are creating or models. These all count as formative assessment tools as well. And you can use them lesson by lesson to get a good sense of how students are progressing toward your standards and how you might adjust your instruction accordingly. In the next section, we're going to talk a little bit about how you might create a formative assessment cycle that allows you to not only check for understanding and pursue equitable grading practices, but also that helps learners gain traction inside of the learning experience as well.